we'd like to start the keynote speech. Mr. Richard Lyle, VP of Intralink. So we will hear about the European venture ecosystem highlights. So Mr. Lyle, please switch on your camera and the microphone, and then the secretariat will share the screens for you. Please start, Mr. Lyle.
Okay, Nagao-san, thank you very much for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a delight to be here this afternoon to talk about the European venture ecosystem. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. Just to give a quick introduction to myself, I've been in Japan for 30 years, so spent most of my working career here. And in those 30 years, I'm heavily involved in trade and investment between Japan and the outside world. So it's an area of professional interest to me. So I'm delighted today to be able to talk about what's going on in Europe. Could you move to the next slide, please? So the first part of the talk today is I'm going to give an overview of what's happening in Europe currently. Next. So just as a refresher, perhaps to sort of give you an overview of Europe and what its economy and so forth. It's a huge area made up of many different countries. So the population of the continent is 748 million people, and it's similar in size to the US. And consists of many countries, so 51 countries and 24 official languages. However, English is widely spoken, so the international language of business is often defaults to English. So much of Europe trades overseas in the English language. Of course, within Europe is the European Union, which is a smaller bloc, but the European Union continues to grow, and new countries are interested in joining. And I even heard on the news again yesterday, there was a conference between European Union and Ukraine, and there was talk about Ukraine coming in to join the European Union in the future. So the European Union looks set to continue to grow. It's of course made up of many advanced economies, many mature companies, and the innovation network is very well developed, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. Of course, internet penetration is high, similar again to the US, and expenditure on R&D is about 2.3%. Okay, next, please. So probably you've seen many things in the news. There's lots of doom and gloom, I guess, in the news at the moment. Of course, the war in Ukraine is on our screens daily, and that continues to. There seems to be no end in sight for that. Because of that, there's an energy crisis going on in Europe and the wider world, of course, and also issues around grain, exports of grain and other commodities. So I think that will continue to be a massive problem, not only for Europe, but the rest of the world, and will continue to affect business in many ways. Also, the energy crisis, winter is coming in Europe. So I think, again, on the news, you will see the energy crisis come up again and again on the news. It's obviously going to drive new innovation around less dependency on fossil fuels and move towards more renewable sources of energy. But as we all know, innovation in the energy space is a long-term thing. You can't just fix things overnight. So I think this will speed up probably the process of moving to a more sustainable and renewable forms of energy. We also see that inflation is rising. So across the European continent, the average now is about 10%. Obviously, it varies from country to country. But again, this is historically the last 10 years, inflation has been very, very low. So inflation is rapidly increasing in Europe. And because of that, the cost of living crisis is deepening. So I think the gap between the rich and the poor will grow bigger, and again, will need to be addressed. So I think in summary on this slide, there's lots of issues and problems in Europe, but I think innovation still continues. And I think especially around the energy crisis, that should hopefully speed up the move to more sustainable forms of energy generation. Next, please. So just to perhaps give you a sense of funding of the innovation startups and the innovation out of Europe. So until 2021, Europe was going gangbusters. It was really every year records were being broken for investments, exits, successful exits, IPOs, development of new unicorn companies, and so forth. So up until 2021, everything was looking very rosy in Europe and very positive, and actually performing a lot better than our counterparts in the US. Next slide, please. But of course, in 2022, things have stalled. Not surprisingly, when I was talking about the slide about the inflation and the energy crisis, of course, it's also affected VC money and funding of startups. So if you look in the center there at the graph, this is VC exits. So in 2021, a huge amount, and then that's dropped off significantly this year. So this year has been quite challenging for funding of innovation and exits and so forth. But if we go to the next slide, please. I think the underlying indicators are still very strong within Europe for innovation. So you can see there on the two graphs on the left, over the past 10 or so years, investment has grown and grown increasingly at a higher pace. The number of returns on investments has significantly increased. This year, of course, we haven't finished this year yet. The numbers are down, but I think the underlying indicators are still very positive. Investment still is happening. Funds are being raised, and there still continue to be exits of companies and so forth by acquisition and so forth. And I think in certain sectors also there still is very strong technologies coming out of Europe, especially around cloud, cybersecurity, digital payments, and so forth. So despite perhaps the dip this year, I think in the years to come, Europe will come back strong again. So I think if you take a long-term view on Europe, then everything should be good. Okay, next, please. So just to perhaps give a final slide on an overview on Europe. So of course, with the growth in the innovation ecosystem in Europe, not surprisingly, Japanese corporates have followed this and have increasingly focused their activities on Europe to gain access to new and interesting technologies. So you can see the graph on the left there, that the number of corporates with innovation operations in Europe has steadily increased over the years, and as of last year was up to 53. This year, of course, it may slow down, but the underlying trend again is upwards. And on the right there, you can just see a few examples of some companies and their innovation activities in Europe. So within that, most sectors are covered. So of course, depending on the company, the sectors will vary. But of course, healthcare, digital, cloud, cybersecurity, and of course, energy feature very, very strongly in a lot of Japanese corporates' interests out of Europe. Okay, next, please. Okay, so next I'm going to talk a little bit about the startup ecosystem in Europe and give you a feel for what it's composed of and so forth. So can you move on to the next slide, please? Okay, so often, Japan looks to Silicon Valley and the US for innovation, rightly so, because of course a lot of good stuff is going on there. But Europe is equally as strong, if not better, in many ways. So I think what this slide shows is that actually throughout Europe, there's a similar amount of engineers and highly skilled staff operating in Europe. That can work at venture companies and startups and help with innovation out of Europe. So there's a huge talent pool within Europe to gain access from, not only through the startup network, but also if Japanese companies have offices over in Europe, those are engineers that could be working for those companies. Here, of course, 3 key cities within Europe are London, Paris, and Berlin, where a lot of innovation comes out of. But again, as we talk about slides going forward, you'll see that actually innovation is happening all over Europe across all sectors. So whilst there are some areas which are especially strong, that does not mean that other areas, there's innovation not happening in other areas of Europe. It's across the board. Okay, next, please. So again, this gives you a feel for perhaps the basis of why so much innovation is coming out of Europe. You can see the statistic on the left that 90% of startup employees have graduated from European universities. So startups in Europe have a very strong technical and academic focus. So a lot of startups are based on very strong technologies that often spun out of universities and then are taken forward by very, very bright and intelligent people. Then looking at some of the, where the graduates come from, again, no surprises. There's some key areas where, such as London, where a lot of the graduates come from. But again, I think this slide shows that graduates come from all over Europe to work at startups, and they're often very mobile. So graduates in London won't necessarily always stay in London. They might move to Berlin or Paris or other parts of Europe to work in interesting companies. Okay, next, please. And then I think another important thing to say is that a lot of European startups are often, born global. So they're based on, interesting technologies, of course, and those technologies are needed around the world, not just in the country where they're developed and nurtured. So 62% of startups often have presence in other countries, and that could be within Europe or wider areas such as North America and Asia. So again, I think this shows that startups, although they might be small in number, or often have a footprint around the world and are very globally focused. Because they're solving problems on a global scale, not necessarily a local scale. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so there's a lot to talk about on this slide, so we'll spend a bit of time here. So this gives a feel for perhaps the scale and the trends of innovation and the startup ecosystem in Europe. So if we look at some of the statistics down the left-hand side there, there's 167,000 active startups across Europe. So a huge number of new companies being spun out of universities or people with ideas to solve issues. Of course, as we know, not all startups succeed. A large number fail, but that's part of the innovation ethos and way of doing things, that any number of companies will fail, but a few very, very good ones do succeed and then go on to become big and very interesting companies. The amount of funding is huge as well. So $414 billion of VC funding, and the ecosystem is valued at $3.1 trillion. Of course, as I mentioned before, Three of the key hubs are London, Paris, and Berlin. But of course, there are many other very interesting hubs across of Europe, of course, in the rest of the UK, and France and Germany and the Nordics, and southern parts of Europe as well. And then the bottom statistic there is there's 132 unicorns that have come out of Europe. Next, then, if we look at the graph in the center there, again, this paints a very positive picture of continued growth in investment, and that growth has sped up immensely over the past few years. So if we recall, back in 2020, the pandemic was hit the world. Everyone was working from home. We were all online. But during that year, investment in startups grew 150%. So despite the pandemic and the negative headlines we may have had from that, innovation still was very, very strong out of Europe. This year, we shall see. It may have taken a small knock because of obviously some of the issues I've talked about earlier. But again, I think longer term, we see that this trend will continue to grow upwards and look very, very positive. Then if we look at the slide, the pie chart on the right there, so again, innovation and technologies out of Europe falls into many, many different sectors, but probably about half of it is made up of fintech, health, and enterprise software. And then, of course, other areas that are very strong are energy and transport. And transport, of course, is very much linked to energy in terms of batteries and other technologies related to, generation, moving transport from A to B and so forth. And increasingly, food has a very sort of sustainable and green tech sort of element to it, as companies seek more sustainable solutions to feed an ever-growing population around the world and deal with issues such as climate change and global warming and so forth. So whilst fintech, health, and enterprise make up half of the sector, I think it's safe to say that food, energy, and transport going forward will continue to grow and be strong and provide opportunities out of Europe. Okay, next slide, please. So this slide shows that within Europe, although there's a number of hubs I've talked about, London and so forth, innovation and startups are very mobile within the region. So although there's a number of super hubs, there's often other areas which are interesting for innovation. So if you look at the slide, if you look at the diagram on the right there, this is comparing the US to Europe. On the left-hand side is Europe. On the right-hand side is the US. And what this table is showing us, what this figure is showing us, is that actually in Europe things are quite evenly distributed throughout the innovation chain, from pre-accelerator through angel, seed funding, to later stage VC. That's basically the innovation is spread throughout Europe, whereas within the US it tends to be a bit more focused in a few areas such as Silicon Valley. So I think again this shows that basically don't think of Europe as just London or Berlin or Paris. Think of Europe as a whole huge area with very interesting innovation going on. So we will continue to see really interesting companies coming out of other areas of Europe beyond those hubs. So that's this trend will continue. Okay, can you move on to the next slide, please? Then in terms of what types of money are investing in innovation in Europe? Corporate investment is very, very strong within the European framework. So the slide on the graph on the left there again shows how corporate investment has been rapidly increasing over the years since 2010 and growing rapidly in pace. Again, it was growing rapidly until last year. This year has taken a bit of a hit and not grown so much. But again, I think the underlying trend there is upwards. So although over the next year or two, it might decrease, going forward, we would expect that to come back. And then on the right there, you can see sort of the different types of investors. The blue line there is European investment, and the grey is in the US. So you can see that corporate investment is very, very strong in Europe and not so strong in the US. And then in Europe, there's less investment from pension funds, whereas it is the case in the US. And again, I think that's because there's a lot of corporate investment in Europe. Corporate investment they're investing for a couple of reasons, of course. One reason is return on investment, but possibly more importantly, it's actually to nurture and help emerging technologies for perhaps use within the companies that are investing in them to bring that technology and to their own companies and business units to develop new products and services. So if you recall back to the slide where I showed you about innovation offices of Japanese corporates in Europe rapidly increasing. So again, Japanese investment and Japanese money is growing in Europe and will continue to do so to invest in interesting new technologies going forward. So I think that's a very positive trend and should often, the corporates, they're in business for a reason, to make money, of course. So they can again help companies they invest in to become more commercially focused. So while startups may have very interesting technologies, of course, sometimes they have very bright people that have very great ideas, but sometimes they're lacking commercial acumen until they've grown up, of course, and brought those skills in house. So again, corporate investment can help in those interim periods before those people are brought into those companies and so forth. Okay, next slide, please. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about clean tech now. So as I mentioned earlier, the Ukraine war and the energy crisis in Europe will likely speed up innovation in clean tech and the energy sector in Europe. Energy, though, is of course a long-term thing. So developing new technologies and then deploying those technologies takes years. We will see things change, but it's going to take time for those technologies to be commercialized and then those technologies to then be deployed in the markets around the world. But if we look at the attraction where sort of VC money is being spent within Europe, the graph on the right, the chart on the right there shows the different sort of areas of investment. And right at the top there is planet positive technologies. So those are technologies that help us solve huge issues around energy, but also other areas such as food production, climate change, global warming, and so forth. So planet positive technologies are being heavily invested in. So again, I think as we see increasing problems around global warming and climate change, investment will speed up in these areas to try and address some of the issues of these problems. Okay, next slide, please. Then in terms of climate tech, funding of climate tech startups. So again, we see a positive trend of increased growing investment within this area, and again, growing investment that's rapidly increasing. So I would expect going forward to see this to continue to grow. Although this year it might dip a little bit, but the trend going forward is upwards. A lot of money is going into this. So the sector is worth $100 billion, and there's a lot of interest across the board in this area. So not only is it in hardware, so solutions around renewable energies and batteries and so forth. It's also digital technologies to help better understand energy use and help companies and factories and commercial operations and shops and shopping malls and so forth to be more energy efficient and save energy and so forth. And also, I think important to say that the mobility sector, so transportation, so that's cars and buses and trains and so forth, that's receiving a lot of money, and again, we will see changes there. So the traditional model of people buying their own cars and driving themselves around will change going forward as we see more autonomous technologies and new business models. So in the future, maybe you won't own your car. The car will automatically come to your house. You have an app on your phone, put in the details, and then 20 minutes later, a car will automatically arrive at your house and then take you to where you want to go, and so forth. So it's very, very interesting times, of course, in these sectors, but a huge shake-up. And I think we will see that the traditional manufacturing sector, the automotive OEMs, are already thinking about what the future looks like. And changing their business models and the way they're doing business to catch up with this. Of course, there's EV technologies and other technologies as well. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and then I touched on this a little bit in the last slide, but of course, there's also a huge increase and interest in ESGs and issues around that. So a lot of digital technologies are being developed to make use of public data that can analyze that data and provide really interesting insights in that data to help corporates and governments to change the way they do things. So again, I think we will see an increase in digital technologies, which help companies to better understand what they're doing within their companies, whether that's factories and how they're producing things, or offices and how they're operating. These digital technologies will help develop new products and new business services, which help us to better understand and better optimize the way we're using energy and other sources and other resources to help conserve them or recycle them or reuse them and so forth, to again help with climate change and global warming and to help reduce carbon dioxide emissions. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and then here I just wanted to give you again a bit of an overview to show you how sort of broadly spread innovation is across Europe. It's not just London and a few other cities. So this is a map of unicorns coming out of Europe, and I think you can see pretty much every country across Europe has unicorns have come out of these countries. So again, I think this shows you that really innovation is happening throughout Europe. And then if you look at the companies that have become these $1 billion companies, again, the sectors are varied, but again, it sort of follows the trends and the themes that I was talking about earlier. So IT and cybersecurity, of course, we've got fintech, we've got mobility, AI and big data, of course, and life sciences. So those are the top areas for these companies. But you can see there's a huge range of companies, and they're spread across the whole of Europe, generating a huge amount of value out of Europe. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and then just perhaps to give a feel for the ranking of some of the areas. So depending on the different metric, different parts of Europe have different strengths, of course. So Switzerland has been ranked as #1 as a global innovation index. So tiny country, but a huge amount of innovation goes on there in the healthcare sector and other areas, robotics and so forth. So that continues to be a star within Europe, outperforming its peers. Then when we look at the number of when we look at the ease of doing business, Denmark is ranked as #1 for ease of doing business. That would be the regulations being very easy and very good for business. When we look at the number of startups, then London tops the ranking for developing the number of startups. So it's and then Luxembourg comes after that. And then in terms of research and human capital, Germany is very, very strong. So again, I think this just is further evidence that innovation is spread across Europe. So these areas, shown here, maybe leaders in their different areas, but that's not to say that other parts of Europe have very niche and very sort of strong innovation going on within their countries or regions and so forth. Okay, next slide, please. And then again, I think this is the final slide in this section. So you can see across Europe some of the strengths within each country. So again, it's sort of depending on which country it is, there's different strengths there. But I think you can see a common theme there of the cloud and SaaS solutions are very strong across Europe in general, as is healthcare as well, and then green tech, depending on the area, is rapidly emerging as a very strong element. Okay, next slide then, please. All right. So the next section then, I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the technologies coming out of Europe. So next, please. Okay, so on this slide, this is from some research that McKinsey did. And if you look at what this slide is trying to tell us is, if you look at the circles there, the larger and darker they are, means that Europe has strengths in those areas, or Europe is leading the world in those areas. And then within that, we have three sort of areas of innovation, of the innovation sort of journey. We have innovation being, born. We then have the production stage, and then the adoption of those technologies. So there's the innovation, then production, which is the commercialization of those technologies, and then the adoption is those technologies being developed, or being used in the market. So look at sort of the larger and darker circles there. And so you can see that Europe is very strong in a number of areas. So next generation materials is one of them. And so that's could be nanomaterials. So that's materials used in different applications, of course. It could be in semiconductors, it could be in coating technologies, it could be in batteries, and so forth. So Europe is very strong there, and will remain strong there. Then we also have clean tech, which is strong in the innovation stage at the moment. And I think, again, that bodes well for the future, where the innovation piece at the moment is very strong. So we would expect to see that move through to production in the future and then adoption going forward. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, energy takes a while, is a longer term play in terms of innovation. So whilst it's strong in the innovation stage at the moment, I think in the coming years, we will see increasingly those technologies are commercialized and then are deployed around the world. And then, of course, the future of connectivity, so that's the Internet of Things, 5G, big data, AI, and so forth are quite strong. And then process automation, so industrial applications, again, are strong out of Europe. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I just wanted to give a few examples of some companies in the industrial tech space here. So we won't have time to talk about every single one, of course, but what this slide shows is that across the whole sort of supply chain, there are interesting companies emerging. So from in the procurement side of things, in robotics for manufacturing, and increasingly being used in warehouses to pack and package and pick items for customers that have bought stuff online for e-commerce. Then optimizing logistics to make it more efficient, and so forth. And of course, as economies digitalize, cybersecurity is becoming increasingly important to ensure that all of the data that is now being stored on clouds around the world and being utilized is being stored safely, and that bad elements and criminals aren't getting access to that data. And then, of course, other areas of the supply chain. So again, it's difficult to talk about every single company here, but I think what this shows is that across the whole sort of supply chain, there's a lot of innovation going on, and this will continue. I think a common theme, though, is optimizing not only the production of things that we use in our daily lives, but also making use of data to make sure that actually consumers are being served and being served in their best interest to get the products they want in a timely fashion. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, please. Then I just wanted to talk about some companies in the climate, in the clean tech space, and again, this shows that there's technologies and innovation coming out across the whole sort of energy and clean tech sort of space. So if you look along the top there's different parts. There's energy, industry, buildings, transportation, agri and forest, and retail. And then within each of those sort of subsectors, there's interesting companies coming out. And increasingly, while there are hardware solutions, there's digital solutions that are being developed, which help to analyze data and then optimize operations, whether that be factories or offices, to reduce their energy, or to inform consumers to help them to cut their energy usage, and so forth. So again, there's some sample companies there. We unfortunately don't have time to talk about every single one of them today, but I think this again gives you a feel for some of the breadth and difference of the technologies. And again, these are coming out of multiple countries. These are companies that are coming out of the whole of Europe, not just a few countries. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, and then in deep tech, again, this is some of the companies that have spun out of Europe and then been bought out, and you can see the valuation of these companies are huge amounts of money. So about 188 billion euros of value has been generated, and again, all of these companies show that the technologies cover many different types of sectors, and you can see there, even for the smallest ones, you're still talking $1 billion of valuation. So these are all unicorns. These are all very interesting companies that have grown very rapidly out of Europe and are now operating on a global scale. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and then finally in this section, I just wanted to talk about a few recent examples of Japanese investment in Europe. And I think it's fair to say that Japanese money goes into many different forms of investment. So the examples there, we've got our, so there's a joint venture. So even very, very small companies. So Silicon Sensing Systems is a British company, has a staff of just 13 people, but is generating sales of 22 million pounds. What they produce are high-end sensors, though, of course, for the automotive and aerospace market, and they've now formed a JV with Sumitomo Precision Products. Recently, there was an MOU between Marubeni and one of the councils, the councils in the UK, and this is to develop green hydrogen within that region in the UK. So that's just an MOU at this stage. So again, I think that with Marubeni being involved, that could involve multiple companies in their network, helping to develop the hydrogen ecosystem there in the UK. We also saw a collaboration between Bombora and Mitsui O-SK for marine energy, and then finally an acquisition of a company that makes variable frequency drives that Sumitomo Heavy Industries bought up. Sorry, all of those examples are UK companies, you may have noticed. So that was just the ones I had at hand, but of course, again, there are examples of where Japanese companies are investing around other parts of Europe as well. So this is heavily focused on the UK, but that's not to say that investment is happening in the rest of Europe as well, of course. And I'm sure we will see many deals in years to come. Okay, next slide. All right, just want to finish then with just a couple of slides on us, Intralink. So next slide, please. We're a business development consultancy. We're nominally a British company, but actually we have staff around the UK, around the world. Well, we have them around the UK, but we have them around the world as well. Our office here in Tokyo now, I think this year will reach about 40 people, and we're all bilingual and bicultural, of course. Can you move on to the next slide, please? So we basically do three things. We help overseas technology companies come to Asia. So that's not only Japan, it's Korea and China and Singapore. We also help with corporate innovation, helping Japanese corporates to source innovation out of Europe. And then we do some government work where we help government bodies such as embassies and regions with their trade and investment work. Next slide, please. And here you can see we have a global footprint, offices all around the world. A common theme for us is our offices overseas in Europe and North America are often focused on innovation hubs. So in the North America there, of course, and Europe. And then in Asia, we're focused very much in the capitals of those cities. But in Japan, we do business across the whole of Japan. So often myself and colleagues come down to Osaka as we work with our clients to talk to companies in Osaka, of course. So we're regularly down in the region. So although our office is in Tokyo, we're regularly in the region. Next slide, please. And you can see there from the slide, we're about 130 people strong. We're growing. We're multicultural and multilingual. Okay, and I think last slide next, please. Okay, and yes, we cover for us. Technology is in our DNA. So we work across many of the sectors that I've talked about today. That you can see there in automotive, energy, and so forth. We've been around for over 30 years now and delivered 1,000 successful projects. Okay, I think that's it. Next slide. I think we're finished. Yes, okay. So thank you very much for everyone for listening today. I hope you found that useful. I'm very happy to take any questions now, of course.
ライルさん、ありがとうございました。非常にたくさんのご質問。
Thank you very much, Richard. Well, we have received many questions and similar questions, actually. So I would like to combine the questions. Well, the startups in Europe and how Japan should interact with those startups. The European startups, what are the expectations towards Japan? Is it investment or technology alliance? What are the expectations?
Okay, yes, very interesting question. How long do we have, right? So I would say
10分ですので、
Oh,
少
we
し
have 10 minutes for Q&A,
sorry,
so we may have
yes.
to rush a bit.
Exactly right. So to answer that question in a very sort of short way, so innovation, startups interested in Japan, I think primarily are interested for business reasons. So it's commercial reasons. They have products and services that they believe are of interest to Japanese companies. So the main reason they'll come to the market or be interested in Japan is, of course, to seek commercial deals with those companies. However, they are growing companies and they need funding. So often they will be seeking investment as well. So the advice I would give to any Japanese company, if you're approached by a startup, is first understand that the business they have and what they have to offer. And if it's a fit, then of course, proceed with the commercial discussions. But don't be afraid to ask if they're looking for investment, because I think often investment of that type coming from Japan can be very, very useful for those companies in two ways. Obviously, it's an injection of funds, but also it helps to raise their profile and put them in a stronger position. So it acts as a positive cycle in terms of money comes in, profile, a reputation goes up, and as the reputation goes up, more people want to invest and more people are interested in buying those products. So I'd say commercially, initially it's commercial and then it's investment. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。日本の
Thank you. Well, CVC or open innovation in Japan. Well, some are successful, others are failing, and I think there's a huge gap between success and failure. So even though we have good projects, sometimes we cannot make it into a project. And CVC or Innovation Center, even if they have those windows, it ends there. So the open innovation section in Japan, what do you think is the key for success? And what changes do you think needs to be made? If you have any suggestions, please.
Yeah, again, a very interesting question, and I could spend hours talking about this, but obviously I don't have hours, so I'll give a very quick answer. So I would say, technology is, often innovation are new things, right? So it's new business models, it's new ways of doing things. So of course, making sure that you understand the technology and what it can do is of importance. But importantly, it's really understanding, is that the best fit for the company? So I think to really understand innovation, I think the reason we see the number of innovation offices increasing in Europe is from Japanese companies is for a reason, because to be close to those technologies and to understand them more properly. So I think that trend will increase. So really understanding the startup and the technology is very important. But then equally important is that might be an interesting technology, but does it fit with the business model of your company, right? And so that's where often I think there's a gap between the Open Innovation Office and then the business units. So the Open Innovation Office gets really excited for technology, takes it to the business unit, and they say, no, we're not interested. So I think that's again where Open Innovation Offices, where they're very well connected to their business units, can then articulate the business benefits of those technologies. I think if they can do that, they have a better chance of success. So really understanding the technology, and then making sure within your company, the business units and stakeholders really understand what they're dealing with.
Thank you. Next, the ecosystem of the European startups. Switzerland and Luxembourg, those smaller countries, they are ranked very high, you explained. So what do you think? So rather than the market of those companies, probably there are other reasons why they are ranked high. What do you think is the most important factor, not most important, the important factors that raise their ranking?
Yeah, so I think this is where it comes down to the knowledge economy. So that's where they have very, very strong universities producing not only strong graduates in science and technology, but also strong then technologies coming out of those companies. So that's one area. And then I think the support network is also very important. So you can have great ideas and great technologies, but if they're not supported, they're not going to go anywhere. So within those, because within Switzerland and Luxembourg, they're very well organized to help innovation come out of the universities and then be supported to then grow into companies and so forth. And also because they're such small countries, they have to be global right from the start, right? The market at home is so small. So I think the mindset from the start is we need to be global. So the other thing I would say also is they've been very successful in getting the best talent from around the world to come into in Switzerland to work there. So of course they have very smart people there that are born and raised there, but also they're very successful in bringing smart people from around the world to work within in the country.
Thank you. The next question. Well, there are many countries in Europe, and so I think the industry in Europe is quite diverse. And for the Japanese companies to collect information, comprehensive information, can be quite tough. So European headquarters, if they have a European headquarters, then they might work. But there are other companies who don't have any headquarters in Europe. So there are many companies who are suffering getting information. So for them, at least for them to collect key information, what do you think is the best way for them to collect key information?
Yeah, so again, a very interesting question. If you don't have a presence within Europe, then I think it's clear that you would need help. So internally, it may be very difficult to get that information. So I think that's where external help probably is a way to do that. So that could be consultants that can help to gather that information. But of course, often countries, are offering information and support to help their innovation networks. So the various embassies, European embassies within in Japan, here in Tokyo, and the consulate generals in Osaka as well, or consulates or consuls down there, often they have information, and they run events and seminars and webinars to inform on what's coming out of their regions. But yes, I do agree. Obviously, Europe is huge, right? And many different countries. You can't go to sort of every single webinar from every different country. So it is a challenge. So I would say that's where probably outside, professional support is probably the quickest way to do that. So hiring some consultants who are specialists in that area, who can very quickly understand your needs, and then go and find those technologies or innovation for you might be a solution. Yeah.
ありがとうございます。それでは最後のご質問にご
Thank
ざい
you.
ます。
This is going to be the last question about climate tech. Climate tech and green tech, they are the source of creating or generating energy or saving energy or reducing CO2 emission and collecting CO2. I think there are various areas when we come to clean tech. And in Europe, when it comes to funding and innovation, what are the areas that are most, the people look at most to? So what are the most fastest growing area or the new area, to be more specific?
Yeah. So I think it's probably mixed, but I would say that probably the funding of digital technologies has received a lot of attention. So those digital technologies are using data and analytics to look at factories' consumption of energy, for example, or offices and so forth. So I think those digital technologies have received a lot of funding and a lot of attention. And I think the other area would be new materials. So that's materials around batteries or smart materials used in making things much more in a much smarter way. So that could be making plastics that actually absorb carbon dioxide, for example. So can help actually solve in making one product can actually help to solve problems. So I think those newer companies which have really interesting ideas and to help with environmental issues, I think we'll continue to see funded. So I think it's materials and digital technology, I think will remain strong out of Europe. Yeah.
ありがとうございます。実は他
Thank
に
you
も
very much. Well, we have received so many questions, but because of the time, we have to stop here. So thank you so much. Well, to Intralink, we will continue to ask for your help for us. So we'd like to have next opportunity or future opportunities as well. Thank you so much, Mr. Lyle, for your wonderful presentation and the discussion.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you very much. And again, if anyone has any questions
ありが
after,
とうございます。
very happy to field them. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.